But that started with a big vision of a global vision and chunking it down into daily action steps that are all doable, that you don't have a hesitation on because you know you can do that little action step. Anytime you're living by lower values, you tend to procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate. Anytime you tend to live by the highest value, you tend to be disciplined, reliable, and focused. So procrastination, hesitation, and frustration is a symptom of, one, you're doing something that you don't perceive is clear in your mind with a strategy. You don't see how it's helping you fulfill your highest value, and it's not chunked down enough in a small enough bite. What I found is that when doing corporate consulting with people and companies, I found out that everybody has a different time horizon. A factory worker who's usually has the lowest engagement, that's not necessarily inspired by the job, who's living day to day, goes to job, wants a paycheck, wants to make ends meet, and lives kind of day to day. The supervisor that's governing him lives week to week. The lower management, month to month. Middle management, quarter to quarter, maybe year to year. Upper management might think in terms of a year or maybe further. Then you got the CEO maybe thinking in terms of a decade. And then you might find a visionary or somebody, maybe the owner of the company, the founder of the company might think in terms of a generation. Maybe they're the owner, the CEO of that. Then you got a real visionary that might think in terms of a century. And then you have somebody who's a sage that thinks in terms of a millennium. They're rare. You know, it's like when I wrote out my 1,000-year posthumous biography. You rarely see somebody that writes out goals for 1,000 years. And then you have the soul, and it thinks in terms of eternity. So the magnitude of space and time horizons in your innermost dominant thought will determine the level of conscious evolution you've attained. The more you are living according to your highest values, the more congruent you are, the more the space and time horizons grow. Why? Because when you set a goal that's aligned with your highest values, because you're disciplined, reliable, and focused, you achieve it. You tend to have a desire, once you achieve it, to set a bigger goal, and you tend to expand your space and what you can do and time. And you think in terms first, when you start out, in terms of yourself, then your family, then your community, then your city, then your state, then your nation, then your planet, and then possibly beyond the planet. And you think in terms of expanding your horizons of what you can do. You start thinking, wow, there's more I can accomplish in my life. So the magnitude of that, it was Seneca, the Roman poet, who said, you measure an individual by their most distant ends. So the individual that has the biggest space and time horizon is the person that has the biggest influence in the world. And you'll find if they're the ones that have the biggest impact. He said, if you set a goal that's immediate gratifying, you'll have little impact in life. And people who live by lower values that are injected from others and live according to convention and tradition and conformity and mothers and fathers and preachers and teachers, and they just live squashing themselves by injecting the superegos of other individuals and trying to live under the constraints of everybody else's belief systems, they shrink. They end up in their id, as Freud calls it, the tripartite of the soul, as he described it, the psyche, and it shrinks. And what happens? You have immediate gratification, which costs you. Warren Buffett says, immediate gratification costs you wealth building. Robert Greene says that if you have a very strong emotions and a very immediate gratifying things, you won't be a leader in life. You have to think about a broader vision. You got to stand at a transcendental overviewing effect and looking down on the planet with a perception of transcendence and neither judgment to be able to look back and manage things. Because anything you infatuate with or resent is going to occupy space and time in your mind and run you. And that running you makes you feel disempowered because you're extrinsically driven. And you lose your power. And then what happens is you end up playing small and you play in a smaller shrink space and you start thinking, I want a quick fix. And our world is very commonly in the media today dumbing down and wanting quicker fixed responses. And they don't realize that that's actually dumbing people down instead of actually expanding people outward. And Emerson said beautifully in his essays on circles that we're here to expand circle by circle in an ever greater sphere as we evolve. We want to expand our sphere of awareness and influence. And nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to be less aware. I want to be less fulfilled in my business and successful in business. I want to have less wealth. I want to have a less fulfillment in relationship, less social influence, less well-being, and less spiritual awareness. They all want to have an expansion. So if we're not fulfilling our lives by our highest value and filling our day with high priority actions, inspire us and building momentum and going after and achieving ever greater circles or concentric spheres, and seeing and giving ourselves permission to be like the sage and the soul, we're holding ourselves back and living by limits. And if we don't chunk goals down into small enough bites, we'll hesitate and we won't achieve. And by breaking it down, that's what strategic planning is about. The executive center in the brain was designed to strategically plan and lay things down in big visions and break them down to small bites. I wrote down that I wanted to travel and go to every country on the face of the earth, but I realized that's unrealistic to do in a short period of time. So I gave myself time to do it. And then I wrote down all the things I can do to expand that so I could one by one go to the different countries. We're now soon, in about 2.5 weeks, we'll be at 155 countries now with speaking. And we now have students from every country around the world. But that started with a big vision of a global vision and chunking it down into daily action steps that are all doable, that you don't have a hesitation on because you know you can do that little action step. It's like a domino. You take a little domino and put it next to a bigger domino and a bigger domino, bigger domino. The little one will knock over the next one, knock over the next one, and eventually it'll knock over a building if you have big enough progression of dominoes. And baby steps make big dreams, and piggy banks make big bankies. I don't know what bankies are, big banks. And what happens is you can do that with little action steps. I learned a long time ago, many years ago, probably in my 20s, 23 maybe, that to practice developing your power from a book from Instantaneous Personal Magnetism, what you do is you draw a perfect circle in your mind until you're satisfied. Then you draw a square until you're satisfied. Then you draw a triangle until you're satisfied. And then you go on to more complex structures until you're satisfied. And you start from simple things that are concrete to more abstract things that are more complex. And you train your brain to do what you say and develop a habit of achieving what you're intending. What this does is it builds momentum of achievement. And you automatically, by incremental things, build up. So if you chunk big projects down into small bites, in the breakthrough experience, I say, what is the end in mind? What is the last is first principle? What is the last thing you want to accomplish? Then ask, what are the 7 highest priority action steps I can do today to make that happen? And then any of those steps that are overwhelming, what are the highest priorities, 7 highest priority actions I can do to make each of those steps happen? And if those are anything overwhelming and they're not immediately doable, what are the 7 action steps I can do to make each of those happen? And you chunk it down into such small bites that there's no hesitation, there's just action. And then what happens, you just go from one to the other through the master plan, strategically planning it until you see your vision. And what, they used to say in The Secret, just hold a vision and don't worry about the rest. But you don't get a clear vision unless you strategically plan. In fact, the second you're in your executive center and you get the visionary center up, the V5 and V6 in the cortex of the occipital lobe, once it's on, you see it. And when you see it and you can chunk it and you can plan it, it's yours. So I think it was Phelps that in his swimming could see himself doing every single stroke, every single step repeatedly in perfect form. And that's why he got 22 medals. So anything you can't see in your mind's eye is harder to do. Yeah, they say that those with a vision flourish, those without a vision perish. So taking the time to strategically plan, to get clear on the vision so you can see each step from small to large, baby steps to big steps, piggy banks to biggie banks. I learned wealth building when I started with a small amount of $200 a month. I made it 300, I made it 500, 750, 1,000, 1,100, 1,210, 1,344, 1,464. I just kept increasing at 10% every quarter until it was literally 200,000 something dollars a month into savings. So what happens is you just keep building it incrementally and you build momentum on that and you chunk down the big dream that you have into small bites and build momentums. And I don't believe there's anything in your heart. There's nothing mortal that can interfere with an immortal visionary that's inspired by what they do, that's chunked it down and is willing to take action steps. Like I say, it's the piggy banks that become the biggie banks, the little actions that make the big dreams. So chunk things down by strategic planning into small enough bites where there's no hesitation and watch what happens.